Welcome once again to another episode of Coffee and Volter. In this episode, we're going to talk about a chapter master, who is Marneus Calgar, the Lord of the Ultramarines. And we're going to release it now in line with the latest of the guides that our Patreon, Gerard, is going to release. So, to continue with the routine of the latest special character guide, we, in parallel, are releasing on Coffee and Volter our monograph. Marneus Calgar has been actively in the fight since the year 87, more or less. So he's been actively involved in the fight for almost 35 long years now, which is quite a significant amount of time. And he's actually one of the most important main characters in the extensive lore of Warhammer, playing a crucial role in many of its stories and events. 40,000. He's the Lord of the Ultramarines. He's a highly decorated space marine. He has a dark or somewhat strange history from his origins. And we're going to see how this character has developed over the years. We're going to see how the miniature and the character developed. So, let's get to it. Let's start with the history of the Marneus Calgar miniature. Marneus Calgar enters the history of Warhammer 40,000 in the foundational years of Rogue Trader, when the game's universe was still in its infancy and nothing was completely set in stone. In that first edition, Calgar was not yet the almost mythological colossus that we associate with the Ultramarines today, but a high-ranking officer, among many other special characters who populated an Imperium, that was still chaotic, strange, and deeply experimental. His first miniature, made of metal and with very restrained proportions, even for the standards of the time, reflected that moment of the hobby well. A relatively simple armor, a rigid and functional pose, and the gauntlets of Ultramar present, more as a distinctive feature than as an absolute symbol of power. It was a figure that fulfilled its role on the tabletop, but it wasn't designed to visually dominate an army. With the arrival of the second edition, both the background and the visual identity of Warhammer 40,000 took a decisive turn. And Marneus Calgar was one of the characters who benefited most from that redefinition. Games Workshop began to treat the chapter masters as almost legendary figures, and Calgar's miniature evolved accordingly. Its new metal incarnation gained volume, ornamentation, and presence, becoming a true statement of intent. The gauntlets of Ultramar came to occupy the center of the visual narrative. The armor was loaded with laurels, iconography, and imperial details, and the figure as a whole conveyed an authority that went far beyond the rules. At that moment, Calgar ceased to be just a special character and became the archetype of the leader, Astartes, an aesthetic reference that would define the Ultramarines for years to come. Throughout subsequent editions, the miniature did not undergo reinventions, but rather a constant process of refinement. The proportions became more heroic, the details sharper, and the composition more refined, always maintaining an almost sculptural, solemn pose, as if Calgar were a living statue of the Imperium. This visual stability helped to consolidate his image. Marneus Calgar no longer needed to surprise because his silhouette and iconography were immediately recognizable. For many fans during this stage, Calgar became synonymous with the Ultramarines, a figure that defined what power, discipline, and authority should be within a chapter. Decades later, in the modern era of the hobby, the reinterpretation of Marneus Calgar in plastic and with Gravis armor does not break with his past, but rather culminates it. Everything that was hinted at in Rogue Trader and magnified in the second edition reaches its definitive form here. A large-scale dynamic miniature intended as a centerpiece, but which preserves intact the elements that have accompanied the character since his origins. It is the same Calgar who was born at the dawn of Warhammer 40,000, reinterpreted with 30 years of experience in design, sculpture, and visual narrative. Thus, the story of the Marneus Calgar miniature is also the story of the hobby itself, the transition from the almost artisanal experimentation of Rogue Trader to the current sophistication, without ever losing the thread that connects the present with those early days of metal. Open rules and a universe that was still discovering who it was going to be. But who is Marneus? Augustus Calgar? The Marneus Calgar known today was born as Tacitan, a serf of the noble house of Calgar on the world of Nova Thulium. A companion to the young heir of the house of Calgar, Marneus, both sought honor and an escape from the noble system, training to become space marines. Under the tutelage of Crixus, they trained for a time with other aspirants on Thulium Minor. However, one night, the duo discovered that Crixus and the rest of the aspirants were cultists of Khorne and that they participated in blood rituals. Before they could escape, they were attacked by Crixus and his followers, and during the confrontation, Marneus Calgar died. After managing to escape, Tacitan swore that Marneus Calgar would live on and become a space marine, assuming his friend's identity. Tacitan ended up killing most of his corrupted companions, but was ultimately saved from Crixus by the Ultramarines. The tomb of the real Marneus Calgar exists on the world of Nova Thulium, and it indicates that he died at the age of 12, as would be expected from the incarnation of the nobility of the Ultramarines. Calgar is immune to fear and demonstrates unwavering bravery under fire. Enemy. Where lesser men would dive for cover after taking fire, Marneus quickly assesses the situation, decides the best course of action, and only throws himself into cover when there is no tactically viable alternative. Calgar's achievements and feats are recorded in 28 volumes kept in a vault inside the Ultramarines' fortress monastery known as the Fortress of Hera on Macragge, surpassed in number and magnitude only by the achievements of the Ultramarines' Primarch Robute Gilliman. These deeds include leading the breakthrough assault against the ship, Tyranid hive ship Behemoth Primus, holding the gate alone against an orc horde for a day and a night during the siege of Zalathrax, defeating an avatar of Quain, Eldar, in single combat, which led to the rout of the Eldar forces from the Battle of the Sepulchre of Orar in 888 of the 41st millennium, and recovering the Star Fortress, Indomitus, from the demonic hordes of Makar the Reborn, whom he supposedly banished back to the Immaterium with the help of the Inquisition. In reality, Makar was not banished, but only bound to the core of the Star Fortress, and he would later return to ravage Ultramar again and pose Marneus Calgar his greatest challenge. But let's take it one step at a time. Let's start with the First Tyrannic War. The arrival of Hive Fleet Behemoth at the Eastern Fringe in 745 of the 41st millennium proved to be the greatest threat to the realm of Ultramar since the darkness of the Horus Heresy. On Macragge, the ancestral homeworld of the Ultramarines, the fate of the entire sector would be decided. When the Ultramarines became aware of the imminent threat of Hive Fleet Behemoth, Marneus Calgar, Lord of the Ultramarines, ordered that the formidable defenses of Macragge be placed on high alert. Between a vast fleet of warships and the planet's powerful orbital defense stations, everyone on Macragge prepared to face the threat. Tyranid. Just a few solar weeks later, the Tyranid Vanguard fleet attacked. Hundreds of bioships broke through the Ultramarines' blockade and descended upon Macragge. And soon, thousands of alien beasts devastated the planet's surface. Considering the Tyranid threat too great to be fought in a piecemeal fashion, Calgar grouped his ground forces into three armies. The first and second battle groups garrisoned each of the polar fortresses of Macragge. Taking the fight directly to the enemy, Calgar himself led the third force in a series of rearguard actions with the goal of slowing the Tyranid advance. Now we're going to talk about the Conclave of Hera after the First Tyrannic War. One of the episodes that best shows the character of Marneus Calgar is the Conclave of Hera. It all began when, after the loss of the entire first company of the chapter in the Battle of Macragge, Chaplain Ortan Cassius requested to replace it with the veterans of the Tyrannic Wars, a specialized combat group against the Tyranids. However, creating these specialist groups was not permitted by the Codex Astartes. And perhaps it is not surprising that among the ranks of the Ultramarines, there was reluctance to recognize the legitimacy of the Tyrannic War veteran units. Despite the fact that it was the Master of Sanctity himself who promoted the creation of such squads, most of his comrades raised protests about it, since they were not permitted by the Codex Astartes, and therefore it was unthinkable to form them. A multitude of arguments were made both for and against the creation of Tyrannic War veteran squads, without ever reaching a consensus. In the end, Marneus Calgar ruled that all that discussion, despite generating a great theoretical debate, about the foundations of the Codex Astartes and the intentions of the Primarch Roboute Guilliman was ultimately useless. And in order to put an end to that dead end, the chapter master decreed that all the warriors of the Ultramarines of the Legion, not of the chapter of the Legion, could give their opinion on the matter in a great conclave to be held on Macragge after Remembrance Day, when the chapter pays homage to all those who died fighting the Tyranids of the Hive Fleet Behemoth. Ultramarines from the farthest corners of the galaxy came to the conclave of Hera, and Marneus Calgar waited for as many warriors as possible to arrive before beginning the event in the presence of the Primarch himself. Each warrior had the opportunity to express their opinion on whether or not to accept the veterans of the war. Tyranid as a chapter squad and the chapter master listened to a multitude of perspectives. Chaplain Orton Cassius and the first captain of the first company, Severus Agaman, defended their usefulness and brought a surviving warrior from the Emperor's scythe to the conclave to speak of what he had seen and learned in his battles against the Tyranids. The conclave lasted for several months, and the warriors who had been unable to reach Macragge in time joined it and expressed their opinion, personal. Finally, Lord Calgar ruled, thanks, that he had heard enough and retired to his chambers high in the imposing fortress to meditate on the matter. The chapter master of the Ultramarines spent many days and nights thinking about the different points of view that had been presented in the conclave. And he prayed and fasted so that Roboute Guilliman and the Emperor would guide him in his decision. At dawn on the 40th day, Lord Calgar emerged, thanks, from his chambers, having been informed that several settlements on Spandor had been attacked by Tyranid creatures, monsters that had remained in Ultramar after the battle against the fleet, Hive Fleet Behemoth. Marneus Calgar considered it a sign and declared before all the warriors that the veterans of the Tyranid wars would become part of the military structure of the Ultramarines. That new invasion would be their first test, and if they passed it, everyone would have to recognize their legitimacy. Let's continue with the war for Thrax. In 762 of the 41st millennium, Marneus Calgar led the remnants of his chapter against the Forge world corrupted by the demons of Thrax. Under Calgar's leadership, the Ultramarines banished thousands of demons and recovered crucial data records from the manufactorums warped by chaos. With the mission accomplished, Calgar gave the order for exterminatus. We continue with the siege of Salatras. In one of his most notable feats, in 797 of the 41st millennium, during the defense of the hive city of Salatras, Marneus Calgar held the gates, single-handedly against an entire orc horde for a day and a night. We continue with the Battle of Orar's Sepulchre. In 888 of the 41st millennium, an Eldar emissary from the craft world of Biltan was sent to the imperial world of Comrath to enter into negotiations with its planetary governor. In order to recover an ancient arcane artifact from the sepulchre of one of the Ultramarines' most lauded heroes, Captain Orar, known as the Scepter of Galaxian. When the imperial noble rejected his request, the Eldar emissary became enraged, and soon his pleas turned into threats of violence. The planetary governor refused to be intimidated by the arrogant Xenos and ordered the immediate execution of the Eldar. However, the governor had the foresight to take the Xenos threats seriously and requested help from the Ultramarines. Eldar from the craft worlds of Aleitok and Ienden then proceeded to assault the planet Comras to recover the Eldar artifact guarded in the sepulchre of Orar. Orar was one of the great heroes of the Ultramarines in the years following the Horus heresy. And the chapter master, Marneus Calgar, swore that not a single alien would desecrate the sanctity of his tomb. For the first time since the Battle of Macragge, Calgar led his entire chapter to war. Another of the countless feats of Marneus Calgar is the ambush of Darkhold. In 921 of the 41st millennium, Marneus Calgar was ambushed by a warband of the traitor Legion of the Night Lords while heading to the Darkhold battle zone. The chapter master's ship, heavily damaged, crashed on the sparsely populated imperial feudal world of Barased. Several hundred Chaos Space Marines of the Night Lords made a landing shortly after, but Calgar managed to rally the planet's feudal population and defeat them in a heroic battle. Now things get interesting. Let's go against the demons. Makar, the Thriceborn. Makar, also known as the Thriceborn, was a demon prince of Chaos Undivided, who had once been a chaplain and later a dark apostle of the traitor legion of the Wordbearers, under the name of Malok Cartho, during the Horus heresy. After his mortal death and his apotheosis as a fully formed demon prince, Makar eventually manifested in reality. And in 878 of the 41st millennium, now as Makar the Reborn, he led a chaos pirate fleet and attacked Ultramar again. On this occasion, his fleet was destroyed by a force led by the Second Company of the Ultramarines and its captain, Cato Sicarius, at that time. Captain Sicarius confronted Makar in the Elamar Rift and destroyed a large part of his pirate fleet. Makar himself managed to escape back to the Immaterium. We're back with the Tyranids. The attacks of the Kraken's tentacles. In 993 of the 41st millennium, the Ultramarines suppressed a rebellion on the industrial world of Ichar. But they were immediately on the front line of a desperate defense against the Kraken Hive fleet. Accompanied by Chaplain Cassius and veterans of the First Tyrannic War, Calgar launched a daring assault that severed the synaptic control of the Tyranids, a battle won in no small part thanks to the fury with which Cassius led his brothers in combat. In a repetition of history, Marneus Calgar, who had narrowly escaped death at the hands of the Swarmlord. During the confrontation on Macrega, he faced the reincarnation of the same beast on the blood-soaked fields. This time, however, Calgar triumphed, killing the creature with his own hands. The return of Makar. What a pain. This guy is. Calgar's failure to banish Makar nearly brought disaster to Ultramar. For the demon was freed by the warsmith of the Iron Warriors, Honso, in 997 of the 41st millennium, and later joined him in a campaign to destroy the Ultramarines and their Star Empire. Finally, Calgar confronted the Demon Prince on the battlefield of the ultramarine world of Talasar, and finally managed to annihilate him using a strange blade that dated back to the ancient battles of Kalth during the Horus Heresy, known as the Shard of Erebus. After these events, it is said that a more chastened Calgar became a person of greater humility. And although the officers and rulers of the Ultramarines were disappointed by their leaders' previous prevarications regarding Makar, their love and respect for their heroic chapter master remained intact. Let's now move to the present, the Indomitus Crusade and the Plague Wars. Although he remained as chapter master of the Ultramarines throughout this period of the Indomitus Crusade, while Guilliman was busy ruling the Imperium as its new Lord Commander, his title was changed from Master of Ultramar to Lord Defender of Greater Ultramar. Only Guilliman was recognized as the true ruler of Ultramar. During the Plague Wars, Calgar personally suppressed multiple anti-imperial uprisings and mutinies of the Ultramar Auxilia in the Illyrian region of Macragge. Later, he stopped an orc offensive directed at the Forge world of Metallica using hit-and-run tactics. At some point during this period, Marneus Calgar became the first traditional Space Marine to undergo the surgical process necessary to transform into a Primaris Space Marine. The Calgarian Rites. Although Belisarius Cawl himself would perform the procedure, Calgar was warned that there was a 61.6% chance of failure and death, as the process had not yet been perfected. Calgar was surgically opened from head to toe, and the 3 additional gene seed organs of the Primaris, the Magnificat, the Belisarian Furnace, and the Sinew Coils, were implanted in his body. To start the transformation process, his metabolism had to be stopped and restarted. Although he was clinically dead for more than 20 solar minutes, the Belisarian Furnace eventually activated, and it brought Calgar back to life. And he has done it more than once when he faced Abaddon. Although it was an extremely dangerous and far from simple process, Calgar showed the other traditional Space Marines that a new path was possible for the Adeptus Astartes. After his transformation, Calgar began to wear the armor of Heraclus, a suit of Mark X Gravis power armor specially designed to fit his new and larger Primaris body. Let's now move on to Vigilus. The War of the Beasts. During the multi-front conflict known as the War of the Beasts, Marneus Calgar led the Imperial Defenders of the World. Sentinel World of Vigilus, a location of enormous strategic importance within the Imperium Nihilus. The Emperor's servants faced assaults from orcs, Genestealer cults, Eldar from the Craft Worlds, and Drukhari raiders. However, the greatest threat manifested in the form of a force of heretic Astartes from the Black Legion, led by the Chaos Lord Harkon Worldclaimer. Now then, to finish, let's see what panoply Marneus Calgar uses. Let's start with the armor of Heracles. Since his ascension as a primaris astartes, Marneus Calgar prefers to wear the armor of Heracles, a suit of power armor. Mark 10 Gravis, specially modified, which provides an unprecedented level of protection without interfering at all with his mobility. Another option that Marneus Calgar has is to wear the Terminator armor of Antilochus. On occasion, Calgar wears into combat the masterfully crafted Terminator armor known as the Armor of Antilochus. In addition to leading a unit of his personal honor guard, the Armor of Antilochus, forged by the tech priests of Adamax Primus, is an exceptionally ornate suit of Indomitus pattern Terminator armor that incorporates a compact teleporter beacon. Now let's talk about what makes Marneus Calgar a legend. The gauntlets of Ultramar, which are an ancient pair of masterfully crafted power fists, accompanied by a set of ornate pauldrons. Compatible with both Artificer power armor and Terminator armor, and a pair of integrated bolters as lethal as a Stormbolter. The true origin of the gauntlets is unknown. The only thing known about these relics is that they were recovered from a fallen champion of Chaos by the Primarch Robut Gilliman himself after the massacre of Reclusium of Gamaliel, who later used them frequently in combat. No Magos of the Adeptus Mechanicus nor Artificer of the chapter has ever managed to penetrate its armor to examine the internal mechanism. When not in use, the gauntlets are kept in a crystal urn in the Fortress of Hera, inside the shrine of the Great Primarch, in the Temple of Correction. Of course, being a chapter master, he wears an iron halo. The iron halo is a halo-shaped ring that is placed above the wearer's head, usually mounted on the power pack of the Space Marine's power armor, although sometimes it is integrated into the gorget. The Iron Halo is a prestigious honor that is granted only to the most exceptional Astartes of a chapter, as a reward for initiative and extraordinary valor. In addition, the Iron Halo generates a protective effect through a conversion field technology, which is poorly understood today. Marneus Calgar. He also carries a relic blade, which he almost never uses because he carries two power fists. For close combat, Calgar uses a relic power sword selected from among the most legendary items in the chapter's armory. And now for the showstopper, Maximus. The Maximus is an ancient and venerated land raider that serves as Marneus Calgar's personal vehicle. Its hull is adorned with passages from the Codex Astartes and scenes of the glorious victories of the Ultramarines. It is inscribed with golden filigree and marble details, and banners and purity seals of ancestral origin wave from its chassis. It is believed that the Maximus has served the Ultramarines since the days of the Great Crusade. Well, I hope you enjoyed this feature on Marneus Calgar. Just a reminder, Gerard Gomez is going to release the final guide for this character this weekend. So you'll have the 3 guides for Marneus Calgar to start painting him as soon as possible. So, see you there.